Hello, everybody, or those of you that are on the way in. We're going to give it a minute here while everybody joins us. We've got a few that are coming in from the waiting room. We'll give them a second and welcome. Welcome everybody to what month is this? The April Carrier's Edge webinar. And I am looking forward to this one. This is going to be a fun session for us today. I am joined by Dirk Kupar, founder and CEO of TruckRight, and I learned very recently a very effusive and energetic speaker on the topic of driver files. So we are going to have some fun because this is actually one of the subjects that I know, I don't know, probably less about than most of the people attending. This is one of the areas that I don't really have a lot of experience on directly. So I'm going to learn a lot, and we are going to pick Dirk's brain about things. And there will be some time for some questions as well. So welcome to the webinar, Dirk.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me.
Okay, so first off, when we did our prep for this, you gave me a couple of really good sound bites that I want to get into in the beginning about driver files, and you mentioned that it is something that people don't really understand very well, are very scared of, and you mentioned that they're often in very bad shape. So let's start off with a little bit of background. So give us sort of the quick summary of how you come to be such an expert on driver files and how this overlaps with your day-to-day work at TruckRight.
Well, I guess for the last 30 plus years, I've between running a international driver leasing company, being an owner operator, and now being the co-founder of TruckRight, driver files and drivers have all I've really lived and breathed. So the driver qualification file is just it's paramount to ensuring that the risk management protection of your company, making sure that they're in order.
So when you were running a driver service, you had to manage the driver files for all of your lease drivers. And I have to imagine that that got to be really tedious.
And that's again, we built technology over the years, and not going to dwell on TruckRate at all. But the reason TruckRate was built was to manage our driver files. We weren't building a company. We were just building something to manage our driver files. The company thing was an afterthought. So no, it and because of the different carriers we did business with, we also had different nuances because we needed to make sure the Canadian compliance was there, the American compliance was there. Um, so it was critical. And at the time when were doing it, we just, nobody else was really in that space.
Mm, okay. Um, Yeah, so now that you've got a system for this, you're not only managing your own driver files, but you're managing the files for all of your customers at TruckRight, and that is one of the foundational elements of TruckRight. Um, what do you typically find when you go and look at the driver files? What's good, what's bad? Talk to us about what you normally see when you go in there.
I just want to qualify one thing, Mark, on that. Kupar, the driver leasing company, we in 2022 got out of the business. So we don't have drivers anymore today. So just
So
wanted to
now
throw
you're
that in.
exclusively focused on serving other people and sort of serving your customers. And I know that a big part of your onboarding with those customers is moving those driver files into the TruckRight system. So that's why I'm curious what you see when you go in there.
Appreciate that. And I'll put the truck rate system aside completely. What we're looking at when we're going into a fleet, the first thing is the conception that the bigger the fleet, the cleaner the records are. And I've gone into fleets of all sizes, and I've been blessed to be on site for about 600 different carriers over the last few years. And getting their house in order is something they all are looking for, and it's part of why having a second set of eyes looking at them was important to them. But so one of the things that I tell fleets quickly is don't be surprised if there is some housekeeping that needs to be done. Different people have likely touched your files over the years, and some of these are generational companies. So it's important to realize that you're not alone, but take the time. And if there's any one part of the regulations that I talk to fleets about is 391. 391, and your experienced people on the call here today will know exactly what I'm talking about. But the misconceptions around 391, which is basically what covers the rules of the driver file, onboarding, safety performance history. But there's a lot of misunderstanding, or I call it kind of truck stop lawyers, where they interpret the rules one way versus what they actually are. And even myself, I keep 391 on my desktop and I go look at it on quite a regular basis. One, things do change infrequently, but they do change. So to be on top of it is important. And anybody that's touching driver files, from a recruiter, processor, right into safety and safety professionals, they should all keep themselves up to date on 391.
So when you go and look, what are there things that you commonly see as missing? You know, if we've got it spelled out in the FMCSR, what needs to be covered, what are the things that people most commonly miss in there?
Doing their investigations properly is probably the number one. It's challenging to get employment verifications from previous employers. So it doesn't get documented as well as it should be in whether or not you've made the attempts, the multiple attempts. There is a misconception out there that you have to do 3 attempts and then you're done, but it's really you have to show reasonable attempts, document if you're not getting any sort of results back from the fleets. Again, when it comes to the regulations, you're doing background checks on DOT carriers. So if the person was a baker or some other job outside of the industry, FMCSA doesn't care about that. What they're concerned with is getting the safety performance history of what the driver, where the driver worked at a DOT regulated company. So probably the biggest hole is that getting the verifications done. The other one is people not really reading the MVR or the PSP reports. And I can explain a little bit more on that if you like.
Yeah, please.
So one of the things, and again, seasoned safety people and seasoned recruiters will know this, so it's no big secret, but avoid the checkbox. Okay, I've got the MVR, I've got the PSP. You actually have to look at them and review them. And what happens quite often, and it's surprisingly quite often, is you'll actually see a record of some sort of infraction or incident that's not related to the carrier in question or a
Hmm.
carrier that's even documented on the application. So that's a big red flag. So the driver worked at ABC Trucking Company from date to date, but all of a sudden in the middle of there on the PSP or on the MVR, there's this conviction with this other carrier
Hmm.
that's not documented. So again, it's a big red flag. The person probably is trying to avoid putting it on their record or on their application so that you don't know about it. But that's what the purpose of those
So what would that be?
investigations.
Somebody who's actually working at a different carrier at the time where their resume is incorrect?
Correct. So in the
Ah.
previous 3 years, you have to make note of all of the employers you've worked at. And let's say a driver's got into an unfortunate situation, whatever it is. Maybe they just started at a company or they've been there for a while and something happens, triggers a release and they move on.
Mhm.
They when they go to the next place to apply, it happens where administratively they forget to put down that employer's name
Right.
and try to try to hide it. So when you get if you just look at, oh, I've got an MVR, it's not terrible. I've got his PSP, it's not terrible. But if you see that they're not terrible, the one incident is related to a carrier that's not on the application, then
Right.
that's problematic.
So you've got to cross-reference the PSP with the actual resume and make sure that it works. with the application showing the employment history. Make
If
sure
you
that
have
they're
any,
aligned up.
exactly. And if you have any Canadian customers on the call or in Canada, there's another record called the CVOR, which is Commercial Vehicle Operating Register, is that will also show the line items and the carrier that they were associated with. So any document that you're pulling on the background of a driver, don't look at it as a checklist item. Look at it as a piece of information that you are truly investigating to make your decision.
So it's an extra bit of research that needs to be cross-referenced with everything else.
Exactly.
So it isn't just a checklist of collect these items and put them in the file. It's got to be dig into all of them and tell them or figure out what they tell you and then build from
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Okay. So who, in your opinion or in your experience, should be the one who's responsible for this within the organization? This seems like it could be a fair bit of work for people that are hiring drivers on a regular basis. So what do you typically see? What works? What really doesn't work in that case as far as responsibilities?
I would suggest that high volume recruiters can be not overwhelmed by the details, but can miss the details of this. The person checking the file is almost an intermediary between safety and recruiting that is a stickler for details and is looking, are the T's there, are the I's there? And so it's that person that they don't need to understand the recruiting process. They don't need to understand um, the safety department, but what they do need to understand is all of these things have to be there in the file, and these are the things that I'm looking for. So it's a person whose attention to detail is really strong.
Hmm. Okay. So it's a detail-oriented person, so it's not a recruiter. I mean, I guess this is probably what a lot of companies do is they have recruiting take care of that.
The recruiting department builds the file, the safety department maintains it once the person becomes hired. And there are companies that the safety department does a good job, and frankly, most of them do. But that tends to be what I see is the gap is between safety and between recruiting and the handoff to safety is where sometimes things get missed. There's a lot of pressure to move quickly, so some people are very flexible of when they collect the information. Well, all of a sudden the person's in orientation and maybe some of the pieces hadn't been completed yet. Well, once the person's in orientation, recruiting is completely forgot. They're moving on to filling the next seat. Safety should be maintaining it. So this isn't a pointing a finger at a department. It really needs to be a person who is a pit bull for detail.
Now, I want to come back to that in a minute, but
Yep.
I think what you're pointing out is that you can end up with skewed incentives because the recruiters generally are going to be incented or bonus based on their activities of hiring people and how quickly they're hiring them, and their job is to fill the seats. Their job is not to weed out people that maybe aren't the best. I mean, they have their criteria, but often if their incentives are on making sure that they get the seats filled, they're not going to be as incented to stick through that file and be patient and wait it out and go through all of those other things. You need somebody else doing that, or you need somebody who's incented to make sure that that gets done properly, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Again, once you start to get into larger fleets, you tend to have a recruiter in the terminology used. I'm not a big fan of it, but you have a recruiter and a processor.
Mm,
Um, the processor really is the one that does a lot of the meat and potato work on the files, processing the file.
mm,
But that person in that role, that's the one that needs to be that pitbull for detail person to keep
okay.
the checks and balance between. And then depending on the size, you may have one person doing that to two recruiters or one to one,
Mhm.
but as you scale, depending on the responsibility of that person, you could have two or three recruiters and that one person doing the processing.
Okay. So that's handling the hiring side of it.
Yep.
What about for you mentioned things that are maintained by safety. So what about things that are happening, drivers that have been around for a long time? What things need to be updated? What's most commonly missing? Where do you see the gaps there sort of for ongoing maintenance of those files?
One of the biggest challenges up until recently, and again, this is not a regulation change, was the annual review that needs to be done on the person's qualifications to drive for you. So the annual review up until recently, the driver had to sign off on it, the office had to sign off it, and the driver had to certify that they had no violations. That part of the regulation is gone. Now the driver doesn't have to sign off on it, but the investigation still needs to be done. Do they still meet your driving criteria? Um, the only exception to the annual review is if you have monitoring through one of the monitoring companies that's actually monitoring the CDL of the driver, the driver's license. But best practice is I wouldn't rely on that annual review exemption. I would still recommend, but again, this isn't regulation. This is more internal policy. I would still recommend that reviews are done, even if the monitoring is in place.
Okay. So they should still be looking at that for every driver on an annual basis. Right.
Correct.
And so does that cover situations? I mean, we've got a question here about, I think, a situation where you come in and you've got a driver file that's missing the reference checks for drivers that started working for you 10 years ago. What do you do about those gaps?
So a lot of companies they'll either outsource or they'll do their own mock audits and they'll
Mm,
go through the files. And when things are missing, one of the things that's really good to do is document that we did a mock audit on April 4th. And on April 4th, we went through Johnny's file and we noticed the employment verifications for Johnny are missing.
mm.
So you put a record in the file that the audit was done. This was found missing. And then going forward, it would be nice to have a policy of what you've done to mitigate that. Again, one of the things people ask, why are files so important? The plaintiff attorneys, whenever something serious happens, the first place they're going to go is to your documentation. And if your documentation is sloppy or missing or whatever, they can't even do their paperwork right.
Mm. Yeah. You're
You're
dead
hung
on it.
almost instantly.
You're dead in the water
So,
at that point.
so if something is missing, acknowledge it, document what the process is going to be going forward. That way, when that plaintiff attorney comes along, a year ago we did an audit, we noticed some things were missing, we documented this is what we did to fix it, so it's not going to happen again. So that way you do have that record.
So you just said there, these are the things we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. You're not going to go back and try and hunt down somebody's employment verification from 15 years ago
No,
because you're not going to get that.
no.
So all you can do is say, yes, we acknowledge this. Here's our process for ensuring it doesn't happen. And would it be reasonable to say that in those cases you do a little bit of extra screening on somebody's current functionality or current position in the company to make sure that you're doing sort of a double check of their annual performance? You're kind of trying to balance it in some other way.
When fleets get to that mock audit stage, or when they actually get to the place where they're reviewing, and frankly, it usually comes up after either the risk person from their insurance group comes in and says, "Hey, need to fix this,"
Mhm.
or they've had to go through an audit and the auditors pointed out something missing. So it usually isn't figured out at the time of a catastrophic incident. It's usually before that, and that's the time that it initiates the review of the files.
So
So
ideally, that's when you're finding it. You don't want to be finding it out at the time of catastrophic incident. Yes, that's a bad time to find out that you've got
it is.
gaps. So you want to be doing those kind of mock audits and annual reviews and having somebody looking through that and making sure that everything is complete on a regular basis.
The mock audit and the annual review, they're two different things. The mock audit, take 10%, 15% of your files,
Mhm.
go through them. If they come back perfect, then you're probably in good shape. If you go through it and 10% of them, of the ones that you have just done your audit have deficiencies, you got to go deeper, and you just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper until you're satisfied that they're right.
And document every bit of that so that
Document
you can show that
everything,
you've got
everything,
kind of thorough.
everything.
All right. Okay.
So if you're doing an employment verification today and the carrier, again, it has to be a regulated carrier, doesn't give you the response, and it happens quite often. Frankly, if a carrier gets an inquiry about a current or past driver, there's not a lot in it for them to give you that information in a timely manner. So it's important if they don't give you that information that you should also document that. Not should, you must document that and put that in the file that you didn't get a response, and you should report them to FMCSA is not meeting the regulations.
Now that's an interesting thing because people don't want to be tattling on their fellow carriers, but it does seem like it's something that is sort of for the betterment of the industry as a whole. It's going to be in everybody's best interest. That so you go and you send a letter. So take me through that process. So what happens there? Because you mentioned that you do a fair number of these through TruckRight service.
It happens through the platform. I would suggest more often than not, when it's happening, is likely because the person that's getting the inquiry at that carrier is probably not the right person. And they just don't know what to do with it. And they don't make the effort to go find that right person internally. They don't know the regulation. So I'm not saying there are carriers that are deliberately not doing it. What I'm saying is it's quite often that carriers don't respond, but I'd like to believe that it's because the person that you're inquiring to don't know. So anyhow, if you get to a point where you're not getting the response, you need to document it. You put it in the file. It's in the regs that you have to put that in the file. You made your reasonable attempts, put that in the file, and then the regulations also state you should report that person to the FMCSA, or that fleet to the FMCSA. Put that in there. And what will miraculously will happen within a couple of weeks, that fleet will get back to you and say, hey, nobody ever tried to get hold of us. Why did you report us?
Right. So when
It,
that happens, FMCSA will contact them and say, "Hey, why aren't you answering?"
we have 100% of those get responded to when they're reported to the field offices.
Okay. So that's a key thing for fleets is to make sure that all of their staff understand that those things aren't optional. When somebody calls for employment verification, it's not answered if you feel like answering it and have nothing better to do. You're required to answer it.
Anybody that touches the driver file process should have internal training on 391. The 391, it's very clear on what's the expectations are for building the file, for maintaining the file, and for the investigation part of the file.
Okay.
It's one thing that's nice about the regs is that it's clearly defined there. And if there are things that you find that you don't quite understand through the interpretation of the file, check with either your state association or your provincial association or the field offices. Don't ever be scared to reach out and ask the question if you're uncertain.
Mhm. Yeah, we have a question here about what about Canadian fleets that maybe don't travel into the US and aren't overseen by FMCSA? Is there something equivalent that they have to deal with?
Unfortunately, there is not. The the National Safety Code does not have the same written rules as the regulations do in the US. So it is a little bit more challenging on the Canadian fleets to get those records. Again, what we see sort of best practice is following the same sort of process that you would do of your multiple attempts, trying to get hold of the right person at the company, and be clearly define what you're looking for. Is that we're not trying to say, do you like this person or were they a good person? Be very specific to the safety performance piece. And we find that most places, if they're driving related, will give you the information.
Right. Okay. Um, but what about timelines for that? Like that seems like something that could take quite a while to finish. Is it something that needs to be completely finished and wrapped up before that driver starts at a fleet or before they start driving?
I, you have 30 days from time of hire to complete the investigation.
From time of hire. Okay. So they could, in theory, be out on the road before this is completed.
They could be.
Does that not open up a legal loophole that you're putting an unsafe driver on the road, or you're putting a driver on the road and you haven't vetted that they're a good driver, they're safe?
I think if they had, I think you would find the best practice with fleets is if that person had one reference in the last 3 years and that one reference wasn't coming through, they probably wouldn't give them the keys.
Hmm.
If that person had 2 or 3 jobs over the past 3 years and they could verify a year, let's say a year is their minimum criteria. If they could verify a year, they've got the MBR, they've got the PSP, they look good. So it's a piece of the pie that you're
Hmm.
investigating. And if
Hmm.
only one sliver of the pie is missing, most fleets will um, calculated risk will accept if the other pieces of the pie look good.
Right. But again, have a policy and stick to it. Lawyers say the
Exactly.
same thing every single time. Have a policy and stick to it. Now, it's interesting. You say if somebody only has one employer in the past 3 years and you can't verify it, then you're less likely to give them the keys. But at the same time, those are the kind of drivers you want. You don't want the drivers who had 10 jobs in the last 3 years. Even if you can verify 9 out of 10 of them, you don't want that jumper.
So a lot of the information on the safety and performance that you're looking at, you can, again, this is for US. You can gather through the clearinghouse, you can gather through the PSP report, through the MVR, and it happens. And right now we're in a turbulent time. There are fleets that are just don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So the driver may lose his job and the company's gone and there's no records to be had.
Mhm.
So what is the investigation there comes down to, okay, we've got all these pieces of the pie. We've got your PSP, we've got your MBR. Um, this is the place that you worked. We can do a search. Yes, they were out of business. The next thing that we're going to do is ask for, again, this is the fleets, not me,
Mhm.
but asking for their pay information
Mhm.
or their W-2s or their W-4s. I'm sorry, I don't
Mhm.
remember if it's a W-2 or W-4, but that's similar to our T4s in Canada.
Yeah.
It's getting a record that showed that you were actually there. Another challenge that fleets run into is the owner operator and doing the
Mhm.
investigation on that owner operator that actually has their own authorities and their own insurance.
Okay, hold that thought because I
Sure.
have a whole section on owner ops and how we handle this for them. But following up on some of the questions, if you don't provide it, if you can't verify that through the employer directly, can you use that info supplied by the driver as employment history? I think you would probably put it in there with an asterisk saying unvalidated, but you're still going to mark it in there and just, yeah, go back to pay stubs and whatever else you can. Uh,
Exactly. It's becomes again back to the pie analogy. You've got the other pieces that definitely meet your criteria. You know that this guy isn't giving you a line or this gal isn't giving you a line because you've done a quick search and the company is out of business.
mm,
So if you've got that information, then you've got so now you can establish this person um, has a license. Again, is there a risk that that person didn't work there? Well, not anymore because you now have again the year-end summaries of their pay or their taxes is the
yeah.
best, and it'll
Okay.
show that they were at actually at XYZ trucking company. And if
Okay.
they had accidents, drug testing issues, they would show up on the clearinghouse or
Right.
on yeah, the severe the more that would show up on the PSP.
Right. And clarification, it came up in the questions as well. PSP pre-screening program. It is kind of a central clearinghouse for driver backgrounds, U.S. drivers.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another interesting question. What if you have a driver? I think I have an answer for this one, but I'm curious. What if you have a driver and see the road test is missing or application is missing? Can you start a new application or do a road test today, even though they've been driving with the company for 10 years?
Again, I would suggest that that wouldn't be ideal. You could reevaluate somebody, but
Mhm.
again, if you put something fresh in the file because it's missing, it could be taken by a plaintiff attorney if you
Mhm.
don't document it properly,
Yeah,
that original information maybe was already there and you just did this, you just changed it to change it.
didn't like it. Yeah.
Didn't like it.
There's
So
that, and then there's also the inconsistent handling. Why that driver and not somebody else? But
yes,
if they've been driving with you for 10 years, you've kind of got their road test because you've got their 10 years
yes.
of history. You've got 10 years of their performance data right there.
On the road test, and I think I mentioned this on our pre-call, is a lot of fleets will look at and say, well, the road test was done by the province or the state because they are the
Mm.
ones that issued the license. What you're doing is doing a road evaluation of today. Where are you today, and are you going to be a safe and fit driver? Not are you qualified to drive a truck because
Right.
that license was
Yeah.
already given to you by a jurisdiction that's beyond your control.
Right.
So road evaluation. I was an owner operator with Atlas Van Lines. We had to do the road evaluation at time of onboarding, but we, as an owner operator, every 2 years we had to do a road evaluation with a certified trainer.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So one other thing that I just want to touch on, we talk about, if you don't have good driver files, yes, your DOA when it comes to catastrophic. A collision, plaintiff's attorney is going to eat you for lunch. But these days, people are sometimes not in a situation where they're thinking that much about that. They're thinking, okay, yeah, that's fine, but it's not going to happen to me. Now, realistically, the state of the industry is every fleet that operates in the US is going to find themselves in court at some point. So you can't say it's not going to happen to me. But sometimes people are not that worried about it and they're thinking, okay, I got bigger fish to fry right now. What are the other downsides to not having good driver files outside of a court case that may happen down the road? What are the other downsides? What are the other reasons to stay on top of this?
frankly, from a upper management perspective that are strictly ops or sales focused, they may not even have much concern to it. The safety guy, when he goes home at night, there's two types of safety guys. One that knows that everything's clean and he's sleeping good. Then the other guy that is scared to get the phone call because he knows things aren't good. So I don't know if I could put my finger on any other thing. You're gonna have your insurance company. If your records are a mess in your insurance company, they're gonna be all over you on your rating. If you go through an audit, there's a problem there as well. And frankly, and there's an awful lot of acquisitions going on today.
Mm.
You want to be sure that all of your documentation's clean at that point as well.
Right. It's going to improve your valuation when you go through acquisition. Interesting points. Okay. So I want to just touch on something else that's come up. We've got a comment about telematics data and including that in the driver file. And that leads to a question that came up very early on in this session about electronic versus paper-based items. One of the things that I've always found funny about trucking is how it still relies so much on paper. And the driver file in many fleets is still an actual folder in a filing cabinet. And I'm horrified by that, especially considering how often terminals burn down. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. So, talk a little bit about the electronic side of it. Is there anything that needs to be in paper that still requires hard copies? How does all of that work?
There are a few jurisdictions that require ink for background screening, but they're few and far between. So you would need to actually produce something. They don't accept digital signatures for a few of the background screening places. But when it comes to the actual, it's in the electronic signature for the driver. It is accepted. Storing your files electronically is absolutely totally okay in all circumstances. What the auditors will do, or what a plaintiff attorney, or what they provide me the records within a timely manner. So if you have to click print, then that's a timely matter. If you have to go to a filing cabinet, it works, but but there's no documentation that's in a filing cabinet that cannot be stored electronically that I'm aware of.
Right.
On the driver file, there's nothing that I can think of that wouldn't be there.
I mean, that's a good part of the value proposition for a system like TruckRight is that you're not dealing with paper that somebody can lose or spill their coffee on or have to deal with or always have in the wrong location. It's centralized, it's electronic. So even things where we see, fleets still talking about as part of their process of updating the driver file, they review things with the driver. They may review telematics data, they review performance scorecards, and have the driver sign off on it. And it's still this old mentality that it's got to be a piece of paper that a driver puts an ink signature on, and that goes into the filing cabinet. There's no need to do that anymore, is there? As far as diligence or audit purposes, you don't see any of that anymore, do you?
Most drivers have access through whatever system that their fleet's on. Most of them have access to a portal. So if there's something that a fleet wants the driver to actually sign, they can go into that system and electronically sign. There's so many different ways to deal with that. The bigger thing, if the driver's getting into some sort of a situation, that it's not just getting to sign off on something, but getting good education with remedial training, or um, ensuring that whatever the situation that you dealt with it, it's not, you don't just, okay, the person got a speeding ticket, we rate him up for a speeding ticket. You need to document the process of the steps, the journey between, we talked about in orientation, or we talked in our safety meetings about driving within posted speed limits. This is the process that happens when somebody goes outside that. This is the process of what we do based upon the severity of that situation. So again, document policies.
And those things can be converted into electronic checklists based on the situation. And then you just sort of follow the process as it's outlined there. We completed these steps at these times, and these people signed off at these times, digital signature, that kind of thing.
Correct.
Yeah. So we have a question sort of relating to that. How reliable is electronic storage or cloud storage versus paper? I could fill the rest of our time talking about how much I prefer cloud storage versus paper-based, but I will leave that to you to answer that. So talk about how it's, your thoughts on the reliability of one versus the other.
If you're storing internally, the first thing that I would strongly recommend is to ensure that you understand what your backup processes are. So if you have on-site servers, or if you have your own cloud servers, ensuring that the backups are properly done. With organizations like ourselves, it's just part of who we are. Like, even though TruckRight is what everybody knows us as, our actual legal name is TruckRight Data Management Inc. And managing data is what we're all about. We have servers in Canada. We have servers in the US. Our backups are done on a regular basis, so that, heaven forbid, if there's a power failure in one area, another area can go. We're like, our data storage SOC 2 ISO 27001 environment. We're responsible to make sure that the integrity of the fleet's data is there. If you're doing it on your own, there are consultants that can help you through the what to look at for in doing it. And if you're doing it on site's no different than the filing cabinet. You have a flood, you have
Mhm.
one battery doesn't work on a backup, and you have a lightning strike, and that file server goes down in your office. It's not a good place to be.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, cloud-based is definitely better as long as it's configured by people who know what they're doing, so it's secure and it's got fail safes and backup. But absolutely no issues with reliability on that. I would not go back to an on-premises server anymore. I mean, that's what I started with. My first IT job in the 90s, it was all on-prem servers and doing manual backups and power management and all of that kind of stuff. I would not go back to that.
No.
It is so much better in the cloud now. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit and talk about owner operator versus company driver. A lot of fleets are using independent contractors that are operating under their authority. Therefore, they have to do some screening, but yet they're independent businesses. So how do you walk that fine line of making sure that you've got a sufficient driver file without stepping on their independence?
That's a good question. And one of the things that we see fleets are doing is really determining the difference between the driver file and the business relationship. They're two different things. So you have a vendor relationship with that owner operator, whether you call them an owner operator, lease, whatever title you want to put on it. If they're on your insurance and authorities, they're just another driver. They are a driver in your pool that needs to be treated the same. The PSP we talked about earlier, if you read in the rule in the release on it, it talks about all employees have to sign this. It doesn't say employees and owner operators and lease operators and this type of operator and that. It says employees, and then there's a definition that says employees in our case means owner operator means this. But so if they're a driver, they're a driver, they're a driver, and you have to follow the rules of the driver. Where it changes is, are they an owner operator under their own insurance and under their own authorities? That's
Right.
where it changes.
Okay. So if you are a fleet, so just reiterating this, if you're a fleet that's using owner operators and those owner ops, lease ops, brokers, contractors, whatever you call them, if they're operating under your fleet authority, you treat them the same as a driver, as a
They are a
company driver.
driver.
Yeah.
Their business entity is a business entity. And the other common thing that we, on the verification of employment that we run into is if that owner operator happens to have drivers driving for them,
Right.
if somebody goes to verify that driver, we have a lot of fleets will say, hey, that guy doesn't work for us. We don't have to verify his employment. If that driver working for the owner operator is running under under the owner operator's truck,
Right.
but your authorities, you have to have a file on that driver. And it's a
Right.
common thing that they try to say, well, it's the owner operator's driver. We don't want a file. Well, no, you have to. Again,
So that's got to add a lot of challenge because you don't have, or I'm assuming you don't have any authority on who that person hires. Like that owner operator can hire a driver, that's up to their discretion. So how do you manage that to make sure you don't have risk there?
and my answer to that is quite simple. You have nothing to do with the hiring process. That owner operator can hire whoever they want,
Right.
but you completely control who operates under your insurance and under your authorities. And under that power is you can accept or reject a file.
Right.
So again, a driver is a driver. You're not stopping that driver from getting employment with the owner operator. You're stopping that driver because you're allowing that driver to continue or not to continue based upon the hiring criteria that should be identical for all commercial drivers. There
So
should not be a,
even if it's a driver employed by an owner operator, you still have the authority to say we're not going to dispatch this person because they don't meet our criteria.
exactly. And you have to maintain a driver file on that person, even if they're not your employee.
And presumably the owner op would be keeping a driver file on that person too.
Well, they definitely should.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because they may want, in theory, they may have multiple trucks that are leased onto different carriers, and they're going to want to have a file of their own on there.
A vast majority of our clients, if an owner operator is hiring a driver, the fleet wants them to present a completed file. So give me everything that's on that person complete as a complete file.
Okay. So here we have a question. In Alberta, a requirement for us is to have the driver's abstract kept within their driver files. The government has told us that we are not allowed to keep driver abstracts electronically due to the confidential nature of their document. Have you come across that with Alberta fleets?
Alberta, Alberta is the thorn in the driver's abstract world. It is different. Pennsylvania, Washington, and California have some similar wordings to it. I am not a legal expert on those jurisdictions, and I would suggest that you talk to your local provincial or state authority. But I know Alberta is unique when it comes to that records. But what the all jurisdictions is you have to be able to provide um, copies of it. and actually, I don't want to put an opinion on Alberta. So that person may be speaking accurately. It's not an area of my
So when
expertise.
you said there's some jurisdictions that are tricky in terms of paper-based versus electronic, those are the ones you're talking about: California, Washington, Alberta. Did you
And
say
it's not so much that
Pennsylvania?
with the ones in the U.S. that I mentioned, it's not so much that they're paper based. It's actually they want them stored in the consumer reporting agency that you ordered them through. So if you ordered them
Okay.
directly from the state yourself, you can store them. But if you're ordering them through a consumer reporting agency, um, unless you have an agreement between you and that consumer reporting agency that's approved by that state, then that can't be. It can't be in
Okay.
your system. It has to be in their system.
Okay. Interesting.
And, and
And
our workaround with jurisdictions that we haven't got the approval yet, which there's one I think left that we don't have. It's just we have a link to the other system that has that record.
yeah, well, it's interesting. Usually Alberta and Quebec are the two that are the anomalies in Canada that do it their own way. But Quebec doesn't seem to have their own rules for this.
Quebec's is actually pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
It's PennDOT, Washington State, California, and if you run intra-state in Texas, there's also some unique requirements. Again,
Mhm.
if you stay in Texas, you should check with your state associations because there are some unique rules that I'm not familiar with. But I know a couple of our clients in Texas have brought them up, but they're not they go outside of the state, so it's never been a concern for us.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Excellent. So one question here. We use driver reach, I guess, PSP, clearinghouse, MVR, warning letters for infractions, along with online training from Carrier's Edge, Concentra for drug testing. Is there anything we can use to keep our compliance? I guess a central location to keep the compliance. Well, I think Driver Reach had a bit of that ability to sort of maintain driver files, but with that now being sunsetted and about to get shut down, I would say move into TruckRight. Where
Thanks
else
for
would
that.
you go?
That wouldn't have been mine because I'm trying to avoid the
Yes.
salesy side of things. People on these calls, they want knowledge. They don't want a sales
Yeah.
pitch.
Let's
So
see
I
if I can do
appreciate the
it for
plug
you.
though.
Yes. Okay. I see we've got a couple of minutes left. Let me go through my questions because we jumped around a fair bit. Um, I want to also go back to something that you touched on in the beginning, and that is the idea of truck stop lawyers and all of the things that they talk about. So you mentioned in the beginning the myth about the number of times that somebody needs to be contacted or that you need to attempt contact. Are there other things that you come up that you're dealing with where truck stop lawyers have said this or that, and people that kind of or places where people misunderstand what they're really required to be doing?
For those of us that drove truck in the 70s and 80s, a truck stop lawyer is just a truck driver on the other side of a CB radio. So that just to add
Yeah,
clarify or clarity. So it's really not a lawyer. It's just somebody on the other end of a
yeah,
CB
quote
radio.
unquote. Yeah, lawyer.
Yes.
Yeah,
Um, the the misconceptions, the multiple attempts is one. Oh, the other one is the employment information. I have to have 10 years of employment history. I have to have 3 years of employment history. I have to verify 10 years. I have to verify 5 years. The rule, again, 391 lays it out clear. And I've run into, there's a difference between fleet's training policy and training regulation. And you'll see a safety person or a recruiter going from one company to another, and they get tripped up on they were trained, but they were trained on a policy, not on a regulation. So again, the regs, the DOT has only the FMCSA and the DOT only have authority over the fleets that are in that program. So if again, back to my analogy earlier, if they were a baker or some other profession, it doesn't matter. So 3 years has to be investigated, then 7 years has to be collected. Best practice is to investigate all of the jobs that that person's had within whatever your company's policy is. It shouldn't be just to meet the minimum standards. So if that person was a truck driver for 2 years and they worked, again, back to being a baker at a donut shop, you still need to do your investigation on all of the jobs because the safety performance is the main thing, but there's also other things that in your hiring decision that aren't necessarily safety related. You can have a driver that has clean abstract, clean references, clean everything, but he doesn't want to do what you want to do. And you need to investigate and you need to really have the conversation.
Good point in separating the regulatory side from the business operation side and understanding which things you're looking for and what you actually need to have captured there. And make sure that the staff understand those differences as well, because sometimes people will think that they don't need to check something because it's not in the reg, but it is actually in your policy. And we could go, the other way around as well, that they don't worry about something because it's not in the policy, but it is actually the regulation.
Being involved here in Ontario, you've got you get Fleet Safety Association, you've got the different state associations. Being involved in your associations, especially on the safety side of it, if you're involved in this, having one or two people in your organization that really are involved and active, it's an unbelievable resource. And again, both the state association, the national associations don't really focus on it. They may have safety conferences, but your state associations, that's their primary thing, especially their safety meetings, is to help. I've been in Nebraska, New York. I've been to a lot of different state associations meetings, and I see mock trials happen, and that's probably the best experience I've ever been involved in at an association where a mock trial, you've got a judge, you've got people going through the whole trial process, and the big one is the files. What do your files look like, and make
Mhm.
sure that they're right.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Actually go to the source on these things. And yeah, state and provincial associations are excellent for those. They do have regular meetings. And yeah, I see the same thing. Washington State Association has got some great monthly safety programs. We have a question here. Can you verify whether or not we need to give drivers authorization to sign a circle check on behalf of a company? Quebec-based question here. So I'm not entirely sure on that one. I think that's one that I would probably say talk to the provincial authority on that one.
Yeah, it's not one that I can speak to on the circle check. Unrelated to driver files, but sort of related to driver files, is who's signing the dangerous goods card or the
Mm.
hazmat card. The dangerous good card in Canada,
Yeah.
it has to be the employer,
Yes.
not the carrier.
Hmm.
So if the owner operator is given if the owner operator is the employer, it's the owner operator signature. We've run into this both at union and non-union fleets in audits where, well, this person is an owner operator, that is the employer. Why are you signing their training cards?
Yes.
Unrelated, but
But no, that's an important one because that's something that needs to be in the driver files and you need to look
correct.
at. You need to be checking that. So when you're doing your annual review, when you're doing your, that mock audit, go and look for those things. Yes, we see that a lot on the dangerous goods cards in Canada as well, that it needs to be signed by the employer and it should have the employer, AKA the owner operator's contact information on it, not the actual carrier.
Yep.
So that's a good one. Okay, let's see. What else have we got here? We got just in a couple of minutes coming up. Not driver profile related, but both Carrier's Edge and TruckRight have great services and great customer service. Thank you. Thank you, Destiny. That is excellent. Much appreciated. When starting out a company and they are not up to date on their DF, the driver files, what kind of letter should I put in that as of today we are making changes? So you're starting out, you go in there and you see that there's gaps. What kind of things should be in there? When you talked about earlier about documenting it, what kind of things would you want to have in that documentation?
Depending on your jurisdiction, it'll be very clear whether you're federally or if you fall under the regs or not, but it's very clear what needs to be in the file. And if their file is completely just non-existent, you can do a single letter, date of investigation, internal investigation, document the things that you were looking for, couldn't find, and put it in the record there. And again, what's your policy of how to build a file, and what's your policy of how to maintain a file? Um, I've just again, I've gone into fleets in Quebec, um, where that run cross border, and nobody was drug tested, and
Ooh.
the owner didn't know they'd always been a provincial carrier. They didn't realize the drug testing was a requirement.
Hmm.
So if you're going to go into a new jurisdiction that's not your own, you don't just pay attention to your regulations or rules. You need to pay attention to all. And that carrier had 33 drivers in the United States driving truck when they found out that they have to do drug testing.
Well, the one that I see a lot on the cross border is people that are hauling hazmat that have got a dangerous goods certification but haven't done hazmat security screening, hazmat security awareness. And DOT is absolutely looking for those when they come to do audits. Now, I think you made a point about the importance of documenting that you investigated, and these are the things that were missing. This is what you're looking for, and this is what you didn't find. But that doesn't end it. You've got to then have an action plan, I assume. Here's what we're going to do about it, and then also document the completion of that action plan, right? Just saying, well, we found these things missing. It's not like, okay, well, there's nothing in there. We documented there's nothing in there. Okay, we wash our hands of it. We're good now. You got to do something with that. Put something together that says, here's what we're going to do. Here are the things we can reasonably do, and then document that they happened, right?
Correct. And what's going to happen immediately is you're going to start building that file going forward, because there are going to be the reviews, there are going to be the abstracts or MBRs, depending on your jurisdiction, that you're going to
Mhm.
be adding to that record. So going forward, having things done properly.
Yeah.
The other one that I see missing or forgotten or poorly done is the statement of hours of service, which is a record of the in Canada the previous 14 days, or in the US the previous 7 days of their work, and be having that properly documented in the file. It's another one we see quite common missing
Mm. Okay.
at that time of hire.
Excellent. Okay. A couple of questions I'm going to try and burn through quickly. Is a certified trainer mandatory, or can it be a trainer experienced in the industry? Well, certified trainer, good luck finding one. There's very little in the way of actual certification programs for trainers. I think most fleets are looking for safety people that have got a CDS or some other designation like that. But have you seen experience, or you come across that where there's some requirement that there has to be some sort of third-party certification on trainers?
There's not a requirement that I'm aware of, but there is the certified director of safety and certified driver trainer through NAPNI. They have both, but there's no requirement that safety director doesn't have to have the certified director of safety.
Yeah.
It's good practice. We have 3 people in our employ here that have that designation.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where you want to talk to your insurer, you want to talk to your customers, find out the kind of things that you're hauling and what are the best practices in there. There may be other people that have opinions outside of that, but I haven't seen anything like that. Uh, do all CDL drivers in Wisconsin need drug and alcohol testing? I think all CDL, well, is that intrastate, I guess? The question is, because federally, the rules are the rules. Yeah. So
well, a
interstate.
CDL over a certain weight, I do
Yeah.
not believe. I'm not familiar with the rules for because you could have a commercial driver's license under a certain weight, and I'm not an expert in that area. I'd be
Mhm.
giving bad information.
Right. So that's one that I would talk to uh, the enforcement authorities directly about that one to just confirm. Um, And do we need to check PSP report if the driver didn't drive in the USA? And I would say the answer would be no on that one. They may
Well,
not be in there at all.
I would, need isn't the word I would use there, is it's $10 or $15 depending on the jurisdiction that you're in,
Mhm.
or depending how you get the PSP. Like it's a relatively inexpensive way to check information. So if the driver is in Quebec or Alberta or somewhere in Canada and says they never drove in the US,
Mhm.
if you don't get the PSP report, you don't know. But
Right.
if you get the PSP report, you may
Uh,
find something that you didn't.
did they actually drive in the US and they're just forgetting about it? Yes, good
Yes.
point.
So
Okay, that's going to bring us to time. So thanks everybody. There is questions that are outstanding. There's a couple that I'll make sure that we get those addressed. You'll all get the recording afterwards. And thanks, Dirk, for attending. This was really excellent.